In this first video, I hope to look at approaches to questioning. As teachers, we spend a great deal of time within the classroom asking students an awful lot of questions. For Rosenshine, effective questioning is not only crucial, but was a detrimental factor in ensuring that students make the necessary level of progress. Rosenshine placed great emphasis on the role of questioning in the classroom. He asserted that there should be a clear and strategically planned system in place to ensure that questions posed to students are purposeful, achieve higher gains, and are a regular feature in the classroom. So questioning should be an every lesson activity. Rosenshine's principle of instruction is that at the heart of great instructional teaching is effective questioning. For Rosenshine, the teacher's questions and students' discussions are a major way of providing this necessary practice. The most successful teachers in his studies spent more than half of the class time lecturing, demonstrating, and asking questions. For Rosenshine, questions are an important means of determining how well learning has taken place. The importance was in the process, how students come to the answer, and not just the answer itself. So for Rosenshine, the question is more than just about the answer. It's how did students come to actually achieve that answer? How do they come to think about the processes? And that is what I hope to think about in my video, how I can use some of my blended learning techniques and use those as a really powerful way to question in the classroom. Questioning is the third of his 10 principles, which is to ask questions. Rosenshine follows by stating, ask a large number of questions. For Rosenshine, asking questions was the all-important element within the classroom. So we need to make sure that within the classroom we ask lots of questions. Rosenshine writes that the more effective teachers were those whose classes made the highest gains in tests, using some of the following strategies, the first of which is to ask more questions. For the purpose of this video, I will review how using a blend of tools can help a teacher to achieve this all-important principle of Rosenshine's, which is all about questioning. Because we can never undermine the importance of good questioning within the class. For Rosenshine wrote that it was not just a mere act of asking questions, it was the type of questions that lay at the heart of the process of learning. Questions need to include elements of process, how a student came to a particular answer. This process of questioning needs to begin at the very start of the lesson. This is the entrance. So as you can see from my screen, these are some of the methods that I use at the very start of a lesson, and it is these methods that I hope to show in this video how we can use these to ask relevant questions throughout the lesson. Using Mentimeter to ask questions, conduct polls, and pose open and close questions in the classroom. Using a tool like Mentimeter is a fantastic way to ask questions. As you can see, there are several ways you can pose questions to the students. So there's multiple choice, there's word clouds, there's open-ended questions, all of which I used in a different way within my classroom. So depending on the type of question I want to pose, or at the stage of the lesson that I'm in, I will depend which one of these question types I will select. I usually tend to start with word cloud if it's just at the start of a lesson, because this is a fantastic way to just quickly get the students engaged with their learning, think about their prior learning, and this really fits in very well with Rosenshine's principles of questioning. It's all about making sure that the questions that we ask are relevant and help with the process of learning, and also to make links with their prior learning. So you can see in this example, I've just used asked the students to enter a few keywords linked with their learning. I've placed this on their Google Classroom. So this is during lockdown. I've shared the code with the students, and they've just been able to just type in some of the keywords that link with their learning. So as you can see, we've got some really good words all linked with the use of the internet, so I'm very happy. There's a few silly things down here, but generally in the main the students have worked really well with this activity. The only problem with this activity, it has a 2-day, 3-day limit, which means that outside of that time the students can no longer engage with this activity. Again, moving on, you can ask more open-ended questions where the actual answers are far more detailed. Students working on their own are more likely to be quite confident in actually answering the questions, and I also found that with this particular approach, which is again very important, is that the whole class engages, which is again very important in terms of Rosenshine's principle of asking questions. So this is how I use this tool, and I've also been able to use it during lockdown and in remote learning. So for me, this has been a very useful tool. Using the Google Jamboard to ask questions, and these can be open and closed questions. This is a tool I use regularly in my classroom. This is Jamboard. It's linked to the Google Classroom, so it's far easier tool to use. The students are all familiar with this, so you simply just set up a Jamboard, you ask a question, you pose whatever questions you want to ask the class. I usually keep these quite simple. As you can see, there isn't really much room for detailed answers as such, so this is just a really quick way to gauge prior learning, which again links very well to Rosenshine's principles, and this is a great tool to use in order to pose the questions and get very quick feedback. So this is what I would do. So usually in my classroom I would have a number of questions that I would add on to my slides. So in the first one, I've just asked simply what is legislation, as this is one of the elements we were covering in the lesson. My next question then is to ask a bit more detailed question. So we're moving on a little further. What do they have to do in terms of legislation? And then I just wanted to ask what some of these elements actually meant and the symbols that we use. So this is one of the ways in which you can use this particular tool. This is really great way to gauge, like I've said, prior learning. It's also a good way in the middle of a lesson. You can just use this in the middle of a lesson just to quickly to confirm and to consolidate learning that has taken place. And again, as Rosenshine always stated, it's about asking lots of questions. So in this way you can ask lots of questions throughout the lesson and very quickly get answers, so not take up too much of your lesson time, which is a really useful tool. The other good use of this particular tool is that you can actually add images. So as you can see in this particular lesson, I added an image and I just wanted to know what this pre-production method was, and you can see I've got some of the answers, and once I've got enough answers we just moved on to the next question, and this needed a bit more detail, so obviously I allocate more time for certain questions. And again, this was one of the questions I asked at the start of the lesson, and it was a very good way to gauge learning from a prior lesson. And this all links in very well with Rosenshine's principles of asking questions in the classroom. The only problem with this particular tool is that it's sometimes difficult to gauge which student actually put the answers down, whereas with some of the other tools that I use, it's very easy to see which students have actually written those particular answers. But this is also good for students because it means that they feel confident, it means that they're all engaged, and that again is a really useful tool. So this is how I use Jamboard in my lesson. I have tried to explain how Rosenshine's principle can be applied when used within the context of blended learning. I have shown how questioning is very important and needs to be an active element of every learner's classroom experience. Questions allow a teacher to determine how well materials have been learnt, and questions must involve process. For Rosenshine, the most important element of questioning was to add process to the question. Students needed to come to an understanding of why they're doing something or learning something. Questions must be used at a regular interval throughout the lesson, so it shouldn't just be at the start or at the end. Questioning needs to be central to everything the teacher does. The use of imaginative and new ways to ask questions, according to Rosenshine, leads to greater participation. So from his observations, Rosenshine saw that where the teachers were far more imaginative, the students were far more engaged. So as teachers, we need to develop methods to increase the number of questions that we ask. I hope to discuss more of this in my next video.